In the quiet suburbia of my life, I once believed in the sanctity of property rights. I thought my land was mine, a tangible symbol of freedom and independence. But how naive I was. The Homeowners Association, that seemingly benign organization meant to preserve community standards, became my greatest adversary. Was it not ironic that an entity created to protect property values would threaten to take away my land? The HOA board, cloaked in legalese and bureaucratic authority, presented their case with such confidence, such certainty that they were in the right. They spoke of bylaws and regulations, of community standards and aesthetic harmony, but behind their polished facade lay a sinister truth. I remember the day they served me with the notice. The paper felt heavy in my hands, weighted with implications I couldn't yet fathom. How could they claim ownership of land I had worked so hard to acquire? Wasn't property ownership supposed to be sacred, a cornerstone of freedom in our society? Their argument was simple yet insidious. They claimed that a technicality in the original deed gave them rights to a portion of my land. A small strip, they said, necessary for maintenance purposes. But I knew better. This was about control, about asserting dominance over individual landowners. The more I delved into their claims, the more I realized this wasn't an isolated incident. Countless homeowners had fallen victim to similar schemes, their rights eroded by bureaucratic machinations. The HOA, once a symbol of community unity, had become a tool of oppression, and so began my journey through the labyrinthine legal system, a journey that would challenge everything I believed about property rights and the justice system. As I sat across from my lawyer, the gravity of the situation settled over me like a heavy fog. He explained the intricacies of property law, the bylaws, and the potential loopholes in the HOA's argument. Each word felt like a piece of a puzzle falling into place, revealing the true nature of their scheme. The legal process was a labyrinth, filled with red tape and bureaucratic hurdles. Every step felt like wading through quicksand, with the HOA's lawyers throwing obstacle after obstacle in my path. They claimed historical precedents, cited obscure clauses, and presented witnesses who swore by their version of events. But I refused to back down. My land wasn't just property. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for. It represented freedom, independence, and the American dream. To lose, it would mean surrendering to a system that seemed designed to crush individual rights. The courtroom became my battlefield. Each hearing was a battle of wills, a clash between the power of the HOA and the determination of one individual standing up for what was rightfully theirs. The judge listened to both sides, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes as the HOA presented their case. Their arguments began to unravel under scrutiny. Technicalities turned out to be misinterpretations. Historical precedents were misrepresented, and their witnesses' testimonies crumbled under cross-examination. The more they tried to assert their authority, the more cracks appeared in their facade. I remembered the countless hours spent researching, preparing, and strategizing with my legal team. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every legal precedent had been carefully considered and prepared. This wasn't just about land. It was about standing up against an oppressive system. The HOA's tactics became increasingly desperate. They tried to delay proceedings, requested multiple continuances, and even attempted to settle out of court on unfavorable terms. But I knew that giving in would only embolden them to target other homeowners. As the trial progressed, a pattern emerged. The HOA's power wasn't absolute. Their authority had limits, and those limits were defined by the law. The more they pushed, the more they exposed their true intentions, not to protect community standards, but to exert control over individual property rights. The legal battle wasn't just about me. It was about every homeowner who had ever felt powerless against the might of a homeowners association. It was about challenging the notion that bureaucratic entities had the right to override individual rights. And as the evidence mounted, as the truth became clearer, I knew that victory was within reach. The court was beginning to see through the HOA's facade, to recognize the injustice of their claims, and understand the true nature of their power grab. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for the soul of our community, for the principle that property rights should be protected, not eroded by bureaucratic overreach. And as the trial moved towards its climax, I knew that the truth would prevail. Have you ever felt like the system was working against you? like the very institutions meant to protect your rights were conspiring to strip you of what's rightfully yours. As the trial progressed, the true nature of the HOA's motives began to emerge like a dark stain seeping through a pristine canvas. Their claims of community preservation were nothing more than a facade, a thin veneer covering their true intentions. The more evidence we uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't about aesthetics or property values. It was about power, control, and the insidious desire to dominate individual landowners. The HOA had been systematically targeting homeowners who dared to question their authority. Witness after witness came forward, sharing similar stories of intimidation and coercion. They spoke of exorbitant fines for minor infractions, arbitrary enforcement of rules, and a culture of fear that had gripped the community. The HOA had created an environment where homeowners felt powerless to challenge their authority. The court began to see the pattern. The HOA's actions weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a calculated strategy to expand the control over private property. They had been using technicalities and legal loopholes to chip away at homeowners' rights, piece by piece. Their so-called community standards were nothing more than a tool for exerting dominance. They dictated everything from the color of your house to the type of plants you could grow, all under the guise of maintaining property values. But their real goal was to create a community where homeowners felt beholden to their whims. The more I learned, the more I realized that this wasn't just about land. It was about the fundamental right to control what you own. The HOA had created a system where homeowners were treated like tenants in their own properties, subject to the whims of an unaccountable board. Their power was built on fear and intimidation. They relied on homeowners' reluctance to challenge them, on their belief that the system was too complex to fight. But I refused to let that happen. I refused to let them erase the line between public and private property. The truth was becoming undeniable. The HOA was not a benevolent organization protecting community interests. It was a bureaucratic machine designed to strip homeowners of their rights, one legal maneuver at a time. And as the evidence mounted, the court began to see the same truth I had uncovered. This wasn't just about me or my land. It was about every homeowner who had ever felt trapped by the HOA's iron grip. It was about reclaiming the right to own property without fear of losing it to an unaccountable board. And as the trial moved toward its climax, I knew that the truth would prevail. The court would see through the HOA's facade, recognize the injustice of their claims, and restore the balance between community standards and individual rights. This was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for the soul of our community, a struggle to reclaim the fundamental right to own property without fear of losing it to bureaucratic overreach. And as the truth became clearer, I knew that justice was within reach. As the trial reached its zenith, the court began to see the full extent of the HOA's overreach. Their claims crumbled under the weight of evidence, their arguments unraveled like a poorly sewn tapestry. The truth was becoming undeniable, a beacon of justice piercing to the fog of bureaucratic deceit. The HOA's witnesses, once so confident, now appeared flustered and uncertain. Their testimony contradicted itself. Their stories fell apart under cross-examination. The more they tried to defend their actions, the more they exposed their true motives. Not community preservation, but power and control. The judges' questions grew sharper, their skepticism more evident. They probed deeper into the HOA's claims, exposing the flaws in their arguments, the inconsistencies in their evidence. Each question was a blow to the HOA's credibility, a step closer to justice. My legal team presented airtight evidence, meticulously researched documents, and expert testimony that dismantled the HOA's case piece by piece. We showed how their interpretation of the deed was flawed, how their claims were based on misrepresentation, and how their actions violated homeowners' rights. The courtroom became a battleground of truth versus deception, where every piece of evidence was scrutinized, every argument dissected. The HOA's lawyers grew desperate, their tactics more aggressive, their arguments more convoluted. But the truth was on our side, and it was unyielding. I remember the countless hours spent preparing for this moment, the sleepless nights reviewing documents, the determination to fight for what was right. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about setting a precedent, about protecting homeowners from similar abuses in the future. The HOA's power began to wane as the court recognized the injustice of their claims. Their attempt to intimidate and over power were met with legal scrutiny and public scrutiny. The more they fought, the more they exposed their true nature, a bureaucratic entity more concerned with control than community welfare. The turning point came when the court acknowledged the pattern of abuse, the systematic targeting of homeowners, and the deliberate misinterpretation of legal documents. It was a moment of vindication, a recognition that the truth had prevailed over bureaucratic manipulation. The HOA's facade of benevolence crumbled, revealing the cold, calculating entity beneath. Their claims of community preservation were exposed as hollow, their arguments of necessity as baseless. The court saw through their deception, and justice began to take shape. And as the trial moved towards its climax, I knew that victory was within reach. The truth had been exposed, the HOA's power had been challenged, and the court was poised to restore balance to our community. This wasn't just about land. It was about reclaiming the fundamental right to own property, without fear of losing it to unjust bureaucratic overreach. As the trial entered its final stages, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The air crackled with anticipation. Every breath seemed to carry the weight of impending justice. The HOA, once so confident, now appeared defeated, their arrogance replaced by desperation. Their last-ditch efforts to salvage their case were pitiful to witness. They presented new evidence, called in additional witnesses, and even attempted to introduce previously excluded documents. But it was too little, too late. The court had seen through their tactics, recognized their true motives, and was ready to deliver a verdict. I remembered the countless nights spent preparing for this moment, the determination that had carried me through the darkest hours. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about sending a message to every HOA that overstepped its bounds, about protecting homeowners from similar abuses. The courtroom became a stage for truth and justice, where every word spoken was a testament to the fight for property rights. The HOA's lawyers, once so eloquent, now stumbled over their words, their arguments falling flat under the weight of evidence and reason. The judge's summation was a masterclass in legal precision. They dissected the HOA's case, exposing every flaw, every misrepresentation, every attempt at manipulation. Their words were a beacon of hope for every homeowner who had felt powerless against bureaucratic might. The court began to lay out the foundation for their decision, methodically addressing each point of contention. They spoke of property rights, of the sanctity of ownership, and of the limits of HOA authority. Each sentence was a nail in the HOA's coffin, a declaration of justice being served. The HOA's board members sat in silence, their faces a study in defeat. The facade of power had crumbled, revealing the petty tyrants who had sought to control others' lives. Their attempt at domination had been met with resistance. Their overreach had been checked, and their abuse of power had been exposed. The courtroom grew quiet as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Every breath seemed to hold the weight of history, every moment a testament to the fight for justice. The HOA's grip on power was about to be broken, and homeowners everywhere would feel the ripple effects of this decision. And then it came, the verdict that would change everything. The court ruled in my favor, declaring the HOA's claims baseless, their actions unlawful, and their interpretation of the deed erroneous. It was a victory not just for me, but for every homeowner who had ever felt threatened by an overreaching HOA. The court's decision was clear and unequivocal. The HOA had overstepped its bounds, violated property rights, and acted in bad faith. Their attempt to seize my land was declared null and void, and they were ordered to cease all further actions against me. But the victory was bittersweet. While I had won my battle, the war against bureaucratic overreach was far from over. The HOA might have lost this case, but their mindset, their desire to control and dominate, still existed in communities across the country. This case would serve as a warning to other HOAs, a reminder that property rights are sacred, that homeowners have recourse against unjust actions, and that the courts will stand up for individual rights when they are threatened. And as the final gavel fell, I knew that while this chapter was closing, the fight for property rights and individual freedom was just beginning. The HOA might have tried to take my land, but in the end, justice had prevailed, and the court had taken my side.